Harder Steenbeck just released a new airbrush that's made from a material no other brand has been able to, creating a performance we've never seen before at about half the price of the competitor's competing product. So, what is this secret material that breaks the airbrush industry, and how can we as miniature painters benefit from it? Let's dive deep into it. This is a story that requires some backstory. Over the past 10 years, there's been two major brands that's been the most hyped and pretty much cornered the entire high-end airbrush market. Especially in the miniatures hobby, Harder Steenbeck and Iwata have about 100% of the high-end airbrush market, with a couple of other brands competing in the mid and bottom tier. And Harder Steenbeck has always had three main versions of their airbrushes to cover the entire span. They have the Ultra for beginners, the Evolution for the everyday use, and they have the Infinity for the high-end and ultra detailed work that you do. The main focus was always to have a reliable product. It's a German brand after all. They're easy to clean and they're easy for beginners to get into. But which one is the best has always been super subjective. It comes up to things: what's your budget? Which one do you prefer to hold? Do you prefer one that is easy to use and clean over a slightly more sensitive trigger? Until about a year ago, where I feel like the mid and beginner range airbrush industry pretty much changed. Because Harder Steenbeck completely redesigned the Ultra and the Evolution, not only increasing the spray quality, but also the ease of use for its intended user, making each one of these airbrushes the most bang for buck in their individual price range. Making the Evolution maybe even a little bit too good. It is supposed to be the mid-range airbrush that's for the everyday use, but the new Evolution outperformed their top line airbrush, the Infinity, making the Infinity feeling redundant. We still had the Micron from Iwata that would still probably be by 50% of the users considered better than the Evolution from Harder Steenbeck. For a lot of people, the Evolution was considered the best airbrush, and for its price, way under half of the Micron, well, it did kind of shake up the industry. But the big question for me was, how can now Harder Steenbeck make another high-end airbrush that the Evolution is this good? And this is where Harder Steenbeck said, hold my beer. So, where does one start? Well, Warwick, the GM and designer for Harder Steenbeck, have worked over the past 2 years completely redesigning the airbrush from the ground up. And let's dive into what is new. When remaking the 2024 version for the Infinity, they decided to reuse exactly 0 parts from the previous Infinity airbrush. And to kind of explain what the difference is, let's take the 2022 Kiev Infinity as an example. The base version of this airbrush was designed some 20 years ago or so. And every couple of years, whenever they find that, oh, maybe we can make slightly better nozzles, or we can make the trigger slightly better, or we can change whatever in the airbrush. They do changes every 3-4 years, but the base airbrush is always the same, meaning that you're designing a nozzle based on a 20-year-old design. With the new 2024 airbrush, everything is designed to work in tandem with one another. And this is great for many different reasons. That means that we have a trigger that is designed perfectly in relation to the nozzle and the distance to it. We have the ultimate airflow and feed of the paint in the airbrush as well. And this alone would probably be enough to catch my interest in looking into this airbrush. But this is just the base of what's been changed. There is something else in here that has never been seen before in an airbrush. If you're a long-term Squidmar fan, you know that I got to visit the Harder Steenbeck factory about a year and a half ago, and they were already talking about mastering using titanium in their airbrushes. Talking about if they would be able to make nozzles from titanium, they'd be able to make them a lot thinner than any other alloy used to make nozzles, and a lot stronger. And making it thinner and stronger would create a much better atomization and give you a much higher control. What it all comes down to, would it be possible? And it was. It did, however, take them nearly 2 years to perfect the process. And as I mentioned, obviously, the main thing is spray quality, but it also opened up doors for other things. One of those things is that the airbrush nozzle on all airbrushes are very fragile. like very fragile. Every time you remove the needle and re-add it, you are in risk of damaging the nozzle. And over time you will have some form of change to the nozzle's shape. Most likely it will be just a little bit wider than it was initially, because every time you push it in, you push the needle in a little bit more than the last time. With some manufacturers, the price of a nozzle range from $70 all the way up to $200 on the micron airbrushes. However, with this beautiful titanium nozzle, you get about 10 times the wear and tear before you need to change it. And the price, well, it's still gonna keep in that range of the Harder Steenbeck nozzles. So if you, for some reason, manage to break it, it's still not going to cost you over $100 to change it. And getting 10 times as much use from your tool, well, to me, that's a massive difference. But I feel like the spray quality is still the #1 thing, and the sensitivity of the new triggers. How finely it atomizes, and the fact that you can now be further away from the miniature and still paint the tiniest details. Previously, you've always had to come super close to get those super neat details. Now you can be slightly further away and still get that. But they've also done this neat thing where if you want to paint super fine detail, but if you feel like you don't have that experience of having the finest control of your trigger work, if you press the back of the trigger just slightly down, it has this neat effect where it opens up the front just a tiny bit, so you can get those super fine details without worrying that you're gonna open it up too much and get overspray on the detail that you want to paint. It's really all about responsivity, and to a ridiculous level. But I did have some worries with this new one, and as someone that's been working with Harder Steenbeck making Squidmar versions of our airbrushes, my big worry was that when they now make an airbrush that is super high-end with a material that no one's been able to make before, completely redesigned from the bottom up, are they now gonna push it up to the price range of the microns, the $700 airbrushes? Because that would kind of push my reputation on the line as well. Am I gonna recommend an airbrush for $700? That is honestly too much money for a miniature painting tool. And if you look what's packed into the airbrush, they could probably make a good argument why they would put the price range up there. Thankfully, despite increasing the spray quality to what's probably the best in the world, making it from a material that's way more expensive to buy and produce, it's still got a price range that's about half of what the competitor has for their micron. Meaning that you'll be able to get one, depending on which model you get, but for around 300 euros as opposed to 600-700. And is this going to break the industry? Well, I actually think so. Because now with the beginner airbrushes, the mid-range airbrushes, as well as the high-end airbrushes having higher spray quality than the competitors, but also at a way more competitive price, I have a difficult time seeing people finding a reason to buy the competitors' alternatives. And as always, I feel incredibly proud and humbled to be able to be part of the Harder Steenbeck release. It is really an honor to have a Squidmar version of the brand new Infinity 2024 airbrush. As always, when it's a Squidmar version, we have black and gold, but this time we also have the really nice red details at the back. Together with the designer John Beldamondes, we have the really nice Squidmar pirate-themed engraving that, surprise, perfectly matches with my pirate giant army, making this, in my opinion, the probably most stunning airbrush I've ever held in my hand. And just like with the evolutions that we've released previously, there is something that's a little bit unique to this one, not just design-wise, but also in terms of mechanics, compared to the vanilla Infinity, and that is the FPC valve that we got in here, so that you can control the air pressure directly on the airbrush, which makes this one even a little bit more unique. Lastly, you might ask yourself, who is this airbrush for? Well, I think that mainly it is for people that want the utmost control, because this is the airbrush where you have the finest control for the finest details. And an airbrush with this fine of a needle and this fine of control does put a little bit more pressure on you as a user to learn how to thin your paints properly and to control the air pressure properly. But I don't feel like you should fret getting one if you're just getting into painting details. Because when it comes to this airbrush, I also feel like it's a great airbrush to start learning these things. So if you have a bit of airbrush experience and you want to get into more detail work and get even better at airbrushing, this is the tool for you. If you've never used an airbrush before, I'd probably recommend you getting the Ultra or the Squidmar Chrome Evolution version from last year. Those two are great for people that are just getting into airbrushing. And this one is for those that want the best of the best. Right now it is available if you follow the link down below in the video description. It's only going to be available for a limited time. It is 3 weeks from when we launched the campaign. So if you want to have one, this is the time to get one, because after that, the Infinity in the Squidmar version is not going to be available. That's it for today, everyone. I hope you have a great day. Peace out.